Imagine the humid haze of a late summer evening in 1992, somewhere deep in the sprawling tobacco fields of rural Georgia, where the cicada's drone masks the whispers of secrets too heavy for the wind to carry. A young woman, barely out of her teens, slips through the moonlit rows of swaying leaves, her breath ragged, her simple cotton dress clinging to her sweat-dampened skin. She's not fleeing a storm, though one bruise in the sky, but something far more sinister, the iron grip of a family legacy that has twisted love into chains. In her arms, she cradles a bundle wrapped in a faded quilt, a child no more than a few months old, whose wide, curious eyes reflect the lantern light with an innocent gleam. But as she pauses at the edge of the property line, glancing back at the grand, white-columned plantation house that looms like a sentinel of forgotten sins, she whispers to the infant, "We gon' break this curse, baby. Ain't no more shadows claiming us." That child, born into a web of deception so intricate it blurred the lines between kin and captive, would one day unravel a truth that shattered an entire community. A mother's deliberate orchestration of unions that bound her own blood to the soil, forcing generations into a cycle of inheritance where skin color became the ultimate betrayal. From this single, heart-wrenching moment, a cascade of emotions floods in. Fear for the fragility of those stolen choices, intrigue at the hidden machinations of power disguised as piety, empathy for souls caught in the undertow of inherited madness, horror at the quiet erosion of humanity, and a suspense that coils like kudzu around your thoughts. You're stepping into a dark tunnel now, one lined with the echoes of muffled cries and locked doors where every shadow hints at the incomprehensible. What drives a woman of privilege, raised in the echo of antebellum grandeur, to gaze upon her own sons, not with maternal pride, but with the cold calculus of a breeder selecting stock? Behind this facade of Southern hospitality lies an unexpected twist, a psychiatric unraveling so profound it transformed familial bonds into instruments of control, a hidden secret buried in yellowed ledgers and whispered confessions that few dared voice, and a disturbing truth about the human mind's capacity to rationalize the irrational, to cloak exploitation in the garb of legacy. This isn't just a tale of one woman's descent. It's a mirror held up to justice's blind spots to how the echoes of historical atrocities can fester in the psyche, making monsters not of the past, but of the present, lurking in the homes we trust. And it begs unsettling questions that claw at the edges of your mind. How thin is the veil between nurture and nurture's perversion? What happens when a family's tradition becomes a prison of the soul? Could such shadows still linger in the quiet corners of our own lives, waiting for the right fracture to spill forth? This psychiatric case, drawn from the shadowed annals of America's underbelly, echoing the grotesque legacies chronicled in tales of human monstrosities, like those in the American Monsters series, lays bare the fragility of morality, how the human mind, that vast and unpredictable labyrinth, can warp under the weight of unchecked inheritance, turning protectors into predators and havens into hells. It reminds us, in the quiet after the revelation, how vulnerable we all are. One unchecked delusion away from becoming the very evil we fear, our sense of safety as illusory as fireflies in a storm. In exploring these depths, we confront not just her story, but our own precarious perch on the edge of empathy's abyss. If this glimpse has stirred something restless in you, a pull toward the enigmatic, a shiver of recognition in the strange, then let's make it count. Hit that like button right now, not just as a nod, but to summon more souls into this circle of revelation, ensuring these dark and inexplicable psychiatric odysseys reach those who crave the unvarnished truth. And in the comments below, type these words to seal your pact with the mystery. I'm ready to discover the truth about this story. By doing so, you're not just engaging. You're weaving yourself into the emotional fabric of this narrative, joining a clandestine community of truth seekers who delve where others fear to tread. Adults from 25 to 80, drawn like moths to the flame of real enigmas, unsolved riddles of the mind, and the sinister undercurrents of human frailty. We stand together, piecing together what society buries, validating each other's courage in the face of the bizarre. Thank you, truly, for being one of us, for choosing the path of illumination over ignorance's easy veil. Your presence here honors that shared quest. Prepare yourself, because what comes next contains a key revelation that will forever change the way you see the human mind. As the young woman vanished into the night with her child, the plantation house stood silent, its white columns gleaming like bleached bones under the storm clouds, a monument to generations of whispered control. Inside, in the opulent parlor lit by flickering gas lamps, sat Delphine Hargrove, the undisputed matriarch of Willow Bend Plantation. At 58 years old in that fateful summer of 1992, Delphine was the epitome of faded Southern aristocracy, her silver hair piled in an elegant chignon, her silk gown whispering against the Persian rugs, a pearl necklace that had adorned necks since the Confederacy's fall. To the outside world, she was the plantation lady, a pillar of the local church, hostess of lavish garden parties where debutantes curtsied and politicians sipped mint juleps. Widowed young after her husband's untimely death in a hunting accident, or, so the story went, Delphine had single-handedly preserved the family's tobacco empire through shrewd dealings and an unyielding will. Neighbors envied her poise, her son's devotion, her ability to keep the estate thriving amid the economic shifts of the late 20th century. But beneath that veneer, cracks had begun to spiderweb, visible only to those who lingered too long in her gaze. Delphine's mornings began not with prayer, as she claimed, but with rituals in the attic study, a room sealed by a heavy oak door etched with family crests. There, surrounded by leather-bound ledgers dating back to 1850, she pored over genealogies not of bloodlines, but of engineered legacies. Her own mother had instilled the doctrine early. In the post-Civil War haze, when freedmen reclaimed names and lands, true power lay in binding souls to the soil through subtler chains. Delphine's father, a Confederate captain haunted by defeat, had murmured to his daughter about preserving the purity of command. But it was her mother who twisted it into something profane, a belief that the family's dominion required not just land, but a perpetual underclass bred from within to ensure loyalty forged in the womb. By the 1970s, as Delphine assumed control after her parents' passing, this delusion had metastasized into a psychiatric fortress. She saw herself not as a relic of slavery, but as a divine curator, selected by God to maintain the natural order. Psychologists later would diagnose it as a severe form of delusional disorder, grandiose subtype, laced with erotomanic fixations, where her mind reframed exploitation as sacred duty. Her sons, Elias, the eldest at 35, a brooding tobacco broker with his father's sharp jaw, Thomas, 32, the affable overseer who charmed suppliers, and young Harlan, 28, the artist whose paintings hung in Atlanta galleries, were the jewels of her crown. Raised in isolation from peers, schooled by private tutors who vanished after awkward inquiries, they adored their mother with a fervor that bordered on worship. Delphine had molded them from infancy, whispering that their blood was the estate's lifeblood, irreplaceable. But whispers among the sharecroppers, mostly descendants of the original enslaved families bound by debt peonage that masqueraded as employment, hinted at darker undercurrents. Women who worked the fields spoke in hushed tones of the choosing, when Delphine would summon a young laborer to the big house under pretense of extra wages, only for her to emerge days later with a vacant stare. Elias, the firstborn, had been the first to feel the weight of her expectations. In 1978, at 21, fresh from a brief stint at Vanderbilt University where he glimpsed a world beyond the plantation's haze, he returned to find his mother waiting in the parlor, a ledger open on her lap. "Elias, my son," she had said, her voice honeyed venom, "the land hungers for heirs who know their place." What followed was no mere conversation but a ceremony of coercion. Delphine introduced him to Mira, a 19-year-old field hand whose family had toiled on Willow Bend since emancipation, her dark eyes wide with confusion as she was told this was her path to freedom. Marry the heir, bear his children, and lift her kin from poverty. Elias, conditioned to obey, complied, his university dreams dissolving like mist. Their union produced 3 children by 1985, all with skin tones that deepened with each generation, a deliberate dilution Delphine catalogued with clinical detachment, to keep them rooted, bound by the mirror's truth. Thomas and Harlan followed suit, paired with selected women in rituals veiled as traditions. The sons, ensnared in their mother's web, rationalized it as love, their psyches fractured into compartments where filial piety eclipsed morality. Delphine's delusion thrived unchecked. Local doctors dismissed her eccentricities as old Southern ways, and the community's willful blindness, fueled by economic dependence on the plantation, sealed the silence. By 1992, the estate buzzed with an undercurrent of unrest. The young woman who fled that night was Lila, daughter of one of Harlan's chosen brides, now 18 and pregnant with her own child by a forbidden union outside the family. She had stumbled upon the attic ledgers while dusting, pages filled with diagrams of pairings, notes on successful breedings where sons impregnated mothers' selections, resulting in offspring whose darkening complexions ensured they could never pass as white, forever marking them as property. Horror dawned as she traced her own lineage, her grandmother forced upon Elias, her mother upon Harlan, Delphine's own blood mingled in an incestuous lattice to perpetuate servitude. Lila's escape wasn't impulse. It was the spark of rebellion in a powder keg of suppressed psyches. As she crossed the county line, Delphine stood at her window sensing the fracture. "They always return," she murmured to the empty room, her reflection in the glass fracturing like her mind. But this time the unraveling had begun, a psychic domino tipping toward exposure. The sons, loyal yet tormented, felt the first pangs of doubt, nights haunted by dreams of chains they themselves wore. In the fields, murmurs grew to murmurs of exodus, the Bred generations awakening to the monstrosity of their origins. Delphine, oblivious in her grandeur, planned the next choosing, unaware that the tunnel's light was piercing her fortress from within. Delphine's certainty held firm as the dawn broke over Willow Bend, the first rays piercing the plantation's canopy like hesitant fingers probing a wound. In the great hall downstairs, where portraits of stern ancestors gazed down with unyielding eyes, Elias paced the creaking floorboards, his boots leaving faint imprints on the waxed oak. The ledger's revelations, glimpsed in stolen moments when his mother dozed, had seeded a poison in his mind, a slow-blooming awareness that the life he knew was built on illusions woven tighter than the tobacco nets. That morning, after Lila's disappearance rippled through the workers' quarters like a stone in still water, Elias found himself drawn to the stables, where Thomas mended a harness with mechanical precision, his hands calloused from years of labor that masked deeper scars. Harlan lingered nearby, sketching charcoal outlines of the horizon, his strokes erratic as if capturing the unease that hung in the air. The brothers, rarely alone without Delphine's overseeing presence, exchanged glances heavy with unspoken burdens. "She's gone then," Thomas murmured, not looking up, his voice a threadbare whisper against the knickers of horses. Elias nodded, the weight of his role as eldest pressing like an invisible yoke. And with her, pieces of us. The delusion that gripped Delphine had not spared her sons. It had infiltrated their psyches like roots burrowing into fertile soil. Psychiatrists, in hindsight, would label it a shared psychotic disorder, folie à trois, where the matriarch's grandeur infected those closest, distorting reality into a tapestry of justified dominance. Elias, once a promising scholar, had buried his ambitions in the fields, convincing himself that his unions were acts of benevolence, elevating the chosen women from drudgery. But Lila's flight stirred memories, the way Mira, his first bride, had wept in the night, her sobs muffled by pillows, her body yielding not from desire but duty. Thomas, the peacemaker, recalled the ceremonies in the parlor, Delphine presiding like a high priestess, reciting verses twisted from scripture about multiplying and subduing the earth. Harlan, the sensitive soul, painted abstracts that bled with hidden symbolism, figures entwined in vines that resembled chains, colors shifting from pale to deep earth tones, mirroring the children's transformations. The brothers' doubts, long suppressed, now surfaced in fragments. A shared dream of escape, a questioning glance during family dinners where Delphine expounded on legacy. As the sun climbed, the estate hummed with subdued activity. Sharecroppers gathered in clusters, their conversations laced with cautious hope. Lila's mother, Serena, a woman of quiet resilience whose lineage traced back to the plantation's darkest origins, stood at the edge of the fields, her eyes scanning the road where her daughter had vanished. Serena had been chosen for Harlan at 17 in 1980, during a harvest festival Delphine orchestrated as a veil for selection. The matriarch had seen in her the perfect vessel, strong, uncomplaining, her skin a rich mahogany that would ensure the offspring's ties to the land remained visible, unbreakable. Serena bore 2 children, Lila and a younger brother, Josiah, now 14, whose features blended Harlan's angularity with her own warmth. But the breeding's toll manifested in subtle fractures, Josiah's withdrawn nature, his aversion to the big house, as if instinct warned him of the blood's betrayal. Serena, enduring in silence, had pieced together the ledger's truths over years of overheard snippets, her mind a fortress of quiet rebellion. Lila's escape was her spark. She whispered to trusted kin. The colors don't lie, the lady's weaving her own unraveling. Delphine, sensing the shift like a change in barometric pressure, retreated to her study, flipping through pages yellowed with age. Entries from the 1980s detailed the first breedings. Elias with Mira in 78, producing a son whose café au lait complexion marked him for fieldwork rather than inheritance. Delphine noted it with approval. The dilution secures fidelity. They see themselves in the soil, not the sky. By the 90s, the pattern escalated. Thomas paired with Ilara, a descendant of original families, yielding daughters whose curls and hues echoed Africa's echo, binding them to domestic roles. Harlan's unions added layers, his artistic temperament clashing with the clinical pairings, yet he complied, his psyche splintering into compartments of guilt and denial. The matriarch's delusion deepened. She hallucinated voices from ancestors urging continuance, her mind a echo chamber where morality dissolved into mandate. Psychologically, it was a perfect storm. Narcissistic traits amplified by isolation, paranoid elements guarding her secrets, all rooted in a transgenerational trauma from slavery's shadow. That afternoon, the brothers convened in the barn away from prying eyes. Elias, his voice cracking like dry earth, confessed the ledger's horrors, diagrams linking sons to brides in a web that looped back, ensuring no escape from the bloodline's grip. "We're not saviors," he whispered, "we're the chains." Thomas, ever pragmatic, pondered flight, but Harlan, tears streaking his face, spoke of the children. Over a dozen now, scattered across the estate, their darkening features a visible testament to Delphine's design. "They turn like leaves in fall," he murmured, "from our pale to the earth's embrace forever marked." The conversation unearthed buried emotions, resentment toward their mother, empathy for the women, horror at their complicity. As thunder rumbled distant, mirroring their turmoil, a worker approached, Josiah sent by Serena with a message. The outside world's calling. Lila's safe, but the truth spilling. The boy, unaware of his full heritage, carried the note innocently, his presence a living reminder of the cycle's cruelty. Delphine, from her window, watched the barn with narrowed eyes, her intuition prickling. She summoned the overseer, a loyal holdover from her father's era, to tighten patrols, whispering of disloyal elements, threatening the family's sanctity. But the fracture widened. That evening, as lamps flickered in the big house, Elias slipped into the study, confronting his mother not with anger, but quiet plea. "Mother, the ledgers. What have we become?" Delphine's response was serene delusion. "Guardians, my son. We preserve what time would erode." Yet in her eyes flickered the first shadow of doubt, a psychic tremor hinting at the mind's impending collapse. Outside, the fields whispered of change, the Bred generation stirring, their collective psyche awakening to the perversion of their origins. Lila, miles away in a battered women's shelter, recounted fragments to a counselor, her words the first thread pulling at the web. The plantation, once a bastion of control, now teetered on revelation's edge, the human mind's fragility exposed in every hesitant breath. As the hesitant breaths of doubt lingered in the air like fog over the tobacco fields, the plantation's facade began to crumble under the weight of accumulating secrets. That night in 1992, after Elias's tentative confrontation faded into uneasy silence, Delphine retired to her chamber, the four-poster bed a throne of isolation where her mind wandered unchecked paths. She dreamed not of remorse but of vindication, visions of ancestors nodding approval from sepia portraits, their voices merging with the creak of floorboards into a chorus affirming her divine role. Awakening with the first light, she dressed in her customary finery, the pearls a talisman against the encroaching chaos, and descended to orchestrate the day's labors. But the estate stirred differently now. Workers moved with deliberate slowness, their eyes averted not from deference but from a burgeoning resolve. Serena, Lila's mother, had spent the sleepless hours weaving a network of quiet alliances, slipping notes under cabin doors, her words simple yet potent. "The colors speak. The lady's blood runs dark in us all. The storm gathered momentum in subtle waves. Josiah, the young boy caught in the lineage's tangle, wandered the paths between fields, his innocent questions piercing the adults' guarded silences. "Why do we stay, Ma?" he asked Serena, as she bent over rows of ripening leaves, her hands scarred from decades of harvest. She paused, her gaze drifting to the big house, and replied in a murmur laced with newfound courage, "Because we've been made to forget we're free." But remembering starts now. Josiah's presence amplified the fractures. His features, a blend of Harlan's artistic delicacy and Serena's resilient strength, served as a living emblem of Delphine's engineered legacy. Other children, scattered across the quarters, their skin tones a gradient from caramel to deep ebony, began to cluster, sharing stories of odd family rituals, of mothers' hushed warnings about the choosings. These young ones, products of the matriarch's delusions, carried psyches imprinted with confusion, their identities forged in the crucible of manipulated bonds. Elias, tormented by the night's revelations, sought solace in the old smokehouse, a relic from the plantation's antebellum days where the air hung heavy with the ghost of cured leaves. There he rifled through hidden compartments, unearthing letters from his university days, missives from a forgotten sweetheart, pleading for his return to a life unburdened by Willow Bend. The words ignited a spark. What if the chains were self-imposed? He confided in Thomas later that afternoon, under the shade of an ancient oak whose roots delved deep like the family's sins. "We've been blind, brother," Elias said, his voice steadying with conviction. "Her mind's twisted us into knots." Thomas, pragmatic yet fractured, nodded, recalling his own bride Ilara's distant stares, her gradual withdrawal into silence after bearing their children. The brothers' psyches, long compartmentalized, now bled together in shared anguish, a folly unraveling as external pressures mounted. Harlan, the most fragile of the trio, retreated to his studio in the West Wing, where canvases leaned like silent witnesses. His latest work depicted swirling forms, pale figures merging into darker shades, vines entangling them in eternal embrace. As he painted, tears mixed with pigments, his mind replaying the ceremonies. Delphine's hand on his shoulder, guiding him toward Serena with words of sacred union. The delusion's grip loosened. Hallucinations of accusing eyes from his offspring haunted him, their gazes questioning the blood's betrayal. Psychologically, Harlan's artistic soul amplified the disorder, turning internal conflict into vivid manifestations that blurred dream and reality. By evening, he joined his brothers in the barn, the trio forming a tentative pact, to seek evidence, to confront the matriarch collectively, to perhaps liberate the bound souls. Meanwhile, the workers' murmurs evolved into plans. Serena convened a clandestine meeting in the old chapel, a weathered structure on the estate's fringe where moonlight filtered through cracked stained glass. There, amid pews etched with forgotten prayers, she revealed fragments of the ledgers, photocopies smuggled by a sympathetic maid. "See here," she whispered to the assembled, pointing to diagrams where lines connected sons to brides in incestuous loops, ensuring generations remained visually tied to servitude. Gasps rippled through the group. Elders nodded knowingly, recalling similar whispers from their youth, while the younger ones felt a surge of indignation. The psychiatric undercurrent pulsed, collective trauma passed down like heirlooms now igniting a communal awakening. One woman, Mira, Elias's chosen, spoke up, her voice trembling yet firm. "Our children turn, as she intended, but that turning reveals her madness, not our fate." Delphine, oblivious in her study, annotated new entries, planning a retrieval for Lila, envisioning her as the next link in the chain. But paranoia crept in. Shadows seemed to whisper betrayals, her grandiose delusion fracturing under isolation's strain. She summoned the overseer again, demanding increased vigilance, her commands laced with erratic urgency. As night fell, a distant rumble, not thunder, but a truck's engine, signaled outsiders. A social worker, tipped by Lila's shelter confession, approached the county line, notes in hand about alleged coercion and exploitation. The plantation's edge buzzed with anticipation. Workers hid lanterns, signaling readiness. In the big house, the sons gathered courage. Elias led them to Delphine's chamber, where she sat by the fire, ledger in lap. "Mother," he began, "we must speak of the truths we've ignored. Her response was a serene smile, but her eyes betrayed the storm within, a mind teetering on the brink where reality and fabrication collided. The confrontation unfolded in measured tones, Elias unveiling the ledger's horrors, Thomas pleading for release, Harlan weeping for the lost innocence. Delphine's defense was eloquent delusion. I have saved us, preserved the essence against dilution's tide. Yet cracks appeared, a momentary flicker of doubt, a hand trembling on the page. Outside, Serena watched the lights in the house, her heart a drumbeat of hope. Josiah clung to her, his questions evolving into understanding. The Bred generations, once passive, now stirred with purpose, their psyches resilient in the face of engineered despair. Lila, safe yet connected by blood's invisible thread, dreamed of return, not submission but reckoning. The storm, no longer distant, brewed in every soul. The human mind's capacity for both delusion and redemption laid bare in the gathering tension. As the confrontation's echoes faded into the flickering firelight of Delphine's chamber, the matriarch's trembling hand steadied on the ledger's spine, her mind a whirlwind of fortified illusions clashing against the son's pleas. Elias, Thomas, and Harlan stood before her like petitioners at a crumbling altar, their faces etched with the cumulative strain of years spent in her shadow. Delphine's response lingered in the air, a veneer of calm masking the psychic fissures widening within. My boys, she said, her voice a silken thread fraying at the edges, you see not salvation but shadows. The essence we guard is eternal. Yet in that moment, a subtle shift occurred. Her eyes, usually sharp with conviction, darted to the window where distant lanterns bobbed like will-o'-the-wisps, signaling the workers' vigil. The delusion, once an impenetrable bastion, now admitted slivers of doubt, her grandiose psyche quivering under the assault of familial dissent. The night deepened, the plantation enveloped in a hush broken only by the occasional owl's call, a harbinger of unseen truths. Elias, unable to bear the stasis, slipped from the house into the cooling air, his path leading to the chapel where Serena's gathering had dispersed hours earlier. There, under the fractured moonlight streaming through the glass, he found her lingering, a solitary figure arranging faded hymnals, as if anchoring herself to something sacred amid the profane. Serena turned at his approach, her expression a mosaic of wariness and quiet defiance, her hands folding protectively over the photocopied pages clutched to her chest. You've come to claim what's left, she asked, her tone measured, laced with the accumulated wisdom of endurance. Elias, his inherited authority dissolving like mist, shook his head, the weight of complicity bowing his shoulders. No, to understand, to end it. Their conversation unfolded in whispers, Serena unveiling the generational tapestry, how Delphine's mother had initiated the pairings in the 1960s, post-civil rights stirrings, fearing the loss of control as sharecroppers sought better lives elsewhere. Delphine, inheriting the mantle in the 70s, amplified it into a psychiatric ritual, her mind rationalizing it as divine preservation, documenting each union with meticulous notes on physical traits, ensuring the offspring's visible markers bound them psychologically to the land. Thomas, meanwhile, patrolled the field's perimeter, his pragmatic nature driving him to assess the brewing unrest. He encountered groups of workers dispersing from hidden meetings, their faces illuminated by pocket flashlights, eyes reflecting a spark absent for generations. One man, an elder named Rufus, father to Mira, Elias's chosen, confronted him under a canopy of stars. Your mother's weave is unraveling, boy, Rufus said, his voice gravelly with age and unspoken grievances. Our blood's mixed with yours, but it don't make us yours. Thomas, struck by the elder's unflinching gaze, felt his own psyche fracture further. Memories surfaced of Alara's quiet withdrawals, her stories of ancestral freedoms whispered to their children at bedtime, planting seeds of independence that Delphine's delusion sought to uproot. The brothers' shared disorder, induced by proximity to their mother's madness, began to dissipate in these encounters, replaced by a dawning empathy that bridged the divides her system had enforced. Harlan, back in his studio, channeled the turmoil into frenzied strokes, his canvas evolving into a chaotic swirl of colors, pales bleeding into darks, forms dissolving into abstraction that mirrored the bloodline's intentional dilution. His mind, the most porous to Delphine's influence, now rebelled with vivid recollections. The choosing of Serena in 1980, her reluctant grace under the parlor's chandelier, Delphine's blessings masking coercion. Harlan's artistic temperament had once romanticized the unions as fated connections, but now he saw them as psychic violations. His role in fathering Lila and Josiah, a stain that no pigment could erase. Dropping his brush, he sought Josiah in the quarters, finding the boy stargazing from a cabin porch. "Uncle Harlan?" Josiah queried, his innocence a piercing reminder. Harlan knelt, voice thick with emotion. "We're family in ways that hurt, but ways that can heal too." The interaction stirred Harlan's resolve, his fractured psyche mending through acknowledgement. A tentative step toward redemption. Delphine, alone in her chamber, paced the Persian rug, her pearls clutched like a rosary against encroaching paranoia. Hallucinations intensified, whispers from the walls, faces in the fire resembling long-gone ancestors accusing her of perversion. Her disorder, rooted in narcissistic isolation and historical trauma, manifested in erratic behaviors, rearranging ledgers obsessively, murmuring justifications about the turning as a merciful anchor, preventing the Bred from aspiring beyond their natural station. Yet the external pressures mounted. The social worker's vehicle, parked discreetly at the county sheriff's office miles away, buzzed with preliminary reports from Lila's testimony, allegations of psychological entrapment, coerced unions, a matriarch's mind warped into a tool of perpetuation. By dawn's first blush, the sons reconvened in the barn, sharing their nocturnal revelations. Elias spoke of Serena's insights, Thomas of the workers' stirrings, Harlan of Josiah's unwitting role as catalyst. Their pact solidified, to secure the ledgers as evidence to facilitate escapes for those wishing to leave, to seek professional intervention for Delphine's unraveling psyche. The plantation awoke to a changed rhythm, workers lingering at tasks, exchanging knowing nods, the children gathering in playful yet purposeful groups, their darkening features no longer badges of subjugation but symbols of resilience. Serena, empowered by the night's dialogues, approached the big house with a delegation, their steps measured, voices unified in demand for transparency. Delphine, observing from her window, felt the delusion's fortress tremble, a key revelation dawning. Her preservation had sown the seeds of its own destruction. The human mind's unpredictability, once her ally in manipulation, now turned inward, exposing the fragility beneath her grandeur. As the group ascended the porch steps, the air thickened with anticipation, the reckoning no longer a distant storm, but an imminent dawn breaking over Willow Bend's shadowed legacy. As the delegation's footsteps echoed on the porch like the first drops of an inevitable downpour, Delphine straightened in her chamber, the ledger slipping from her lap to the floor with a soft thud that reverberated through the room's heavy silence. Serena led the group, 5 in total, including Mira, Rufus, and 2 others whose families had been entwined in Willow Bend's web for generations. Their faces set in determined lines, hands empty but hearts laden with decades of unspoken burdens. The overseer, loyal to a fault, barred the door initially, his burly frame a remnant of old hierarchies, but Elias emerged from the shadows of the hall, waving him aside with a quiet authority that surprised even himself. "Let them in," he said, his voice carrying the timbre of a man shedding long-worn shackles. The group entered the parlor, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and fading magnolias. A space once reserved for genteel gatherings now transformed into an arena of reckoning. Serena stepped forward first, her photocopies unfurled like ancient scrolls, her eyes locking onto Delphine's as the matriarch descended the staircase, her silk gown trailing like a specter's shroud. "We've come for truth, not trouble," Serena began, her tone steady, infused with the resilience forged in fields and hidden tears. She laid the pages on the mahogany table, diagrams splayed out, lines connecting names in a labyrinth of coerced connections, notes on successful turnings where complexions shifted as intended, binding souls to soil through visible inheritance. Delphine's gaze flickered over the evidence her mind's fortress assailed, the grandiose delusion, which had painted her actions as benevolent stewardship, now cracked under the weight of collective scrutiny. Psychologically, this moment marked a pivotal breach. Her narcissistic isolation pierced by external validation of the madness, triggering defensive rationalizations that bordered on the frantic. The sons flanked their mother, Thomas gripping the back of a chair, Harlan twisting a paint-stained handkerchief. Elias standing sentinel-like between the groups. Mira spoke next, her voice a quiet thunder. You chose me for Elias, called it elevation, but it was a cage dressed in lace. Our children. They carry the mark you designed, but it's become our mirror to your mind's maze. Rufus, the elder, added his gravelly wisdom, recounting tales from his youth in the 1970s, when Delphine's early pairings began under the guise of family alliances, her delusion budding from inherited whispers into full bloom. The delegation's words wove a narrative of psychological entrapment, how the breedings fostered dependency, the children's darkening features a subtle tool to erode aspirations, reminding them daily of their place in a system that echoed historical oppressions without overt chains. Delphine's response was a tapestry of deflection and grandeur. You misunderstand, my dears, she cooed, her hands gesturing elegantly as if conducting an orchestra of illusions. I have woven strength, ensured loyalty where the world would scatter us. The turning is grace anchoring you to legacy. But her voice faltered midway, eyes darting to the diagrams, a hallucinatory whisper from the portraits seeming to accuse rather than affirm. The psychiatric layers peeled back. Paranoid elements surged, interpreting the confrontation as betrayal by her extended family, while erotomanic fixations on her sons twisted her pleas toward them. See, my boys, they envy our bond. Elias interjected gently. Mother, this isn't envy. It's exposure. We've all been part of the illusion. His words, born from nocturnal revelations, bridged the divide, his psyche shedding the induced folly as empathy took root. The parlor dialogue extended into hours, the morning sun climbing higher, casting elongated shadows that mirrored the elongated truths unfolding. Serena detailed Lila's escape, how the young woman's discovery of her lineage, traced through ledgers showing Harlan's paternity, intertwined with Delphine's orchestrated selections, sparked the exodus impulse. Josiah, waiting outside with other children, peered through windows, his innocent curiosity a poignant counterpoint to the adults' unraveling. The Bred generations, represented in the delegation's stories, revealed psyches marked by subtle confusions, identity crises where family trees looped unnaturally, fostering withdrawals or overcompensations in daily interactions. One delegate shared how her son, a product of Thomas's union, excelled in school yet shunned opportunities beyond the plantation, internalizing the mark as limitation. Thomas, moved by the accounts, confessed his complicity. I saw it as duty, blinded by her vision. Harlan, tears flowing freely, apologized to Serena directly. I painted over the pain, but it bleeds through now. The son's admissions fueled the matriarch's distress. Delphine paced, her pearls clicking like a metronome of mounting anxiety, her mind fracturing into disjointed defenses, quoting twisted scriptures, invoking ancestral mandates. Psychologists later analyzed this as decompensation, where the delusional system, confronted by irrefutable evidence, began to collapse, exposing underlying vulnerabilities. A childhood steeped in loss, her father's post-war despair, her mother's rigid doctrines, all coalescing into a psychic armor now rending. As noon approached, the social worker arrived, escorted by a deputy, Lila's testimony having prompted official inquiry. The parlor doors opened to them, the delegation parting respectfully. The worker, a composed woman named Clara with a notepad in hand, listened as accounts poured forth. Ledgers presented, lineages explained, the psychiatric undercurrents highlighted without judgment. Delphine, cornered, retreated into silence, her gaze vacant, the grandeur deflating like a punctured balloon. Clara's questions probed gently, uncovering the delusion's depth. Delphine's belief in her role as curator of fates, rationalized through hallucinations of divine approval. The confrontation's ripple extended outward. Workers outside gathered, whispers evolving into supportive murmurs, the children's play infused with a sense of impending freedom. Serena embraced Mira, their shared endurance forging bonds beyond blood. The sons, united in purpose, committed to aiding the transition, releasing debts, facilitating relocations, seeking therapy for all affected. Delphine, under Clara's recommendation, agreed reluctantly to evaluation, her mind's maze yielding to external guidance. As the group dispersed, the plantation air felt lighter, the veil of delusion torn, exposing raw humanity beneath. Yet shadows lingered, the full revelation poised to reshape lives in unforeseen ways. With the parlor doors still ajar from the social worker's entry, the atmosphere in the room shifted like sand underfoot, the once imposing space now a vessel for unraveling truths and tentative hopes. Clara, the social worker, positioned herself at the table's edge, her notepad a neutral anchor amid the charged revelations, as Delphine sank into an armchair, her posture deflating from regal to resigned, the pearls around her neck suddenly seeming like weights rather than adornments. The deputy lingered by the door, a silent observer ensuring calm, his presence a subtle reminder of authority beyond the plantation's boundaries. Serena and the delegation remained standing, their stances a blend of vigilance and quiet triumph, while the sons hovered protectively yet conflictedly around their mother. Clara's voice cut through the tension, measured and empathetic. "Mrs. Hargrove, these accounts suggest a pattern that warrants deeper understanding. Can you share your perspective?" Delphine's eyes, clouded with the remnants of her delusion, met Clara's briefly before wandering to the ledgers, her mind grappling with the intrusion of external reality into her carefully constructed world. The afternoon unfolded in layers of disclosure, each statement peeling back another facet of the psychiatric enigma that had enveloped Willow Bend. Delphine, prompted gently, began to articulate her worldview, not as confession, but as testament. "It started with whispers from the past, you see. The land demands continuity, and I was chosen to orchestrate it." She described her hallucinations vividly now, voices from ancestors guiding her selections, visions of harmonious hierarchies where the turnings ensured balance. Psychologically, this was a moment of partial insight. Her grandiose disorder, confronted by compassionate inquiry, allowed fragments of vulnerability to surface. Recollections of her lonely childhood in the 1940s, her father's post-war silences, her mother's rigid lessons on legacy preservation amid the civil rights upheavals of the 1960s. Clara noted it all, recognizing the transgenerational transmission of trauma, how historical echoes of slavery's aftermath had mutated into Delphine's delusional framework, rationalizing coercive unions as protective measures. Elias, seizing the opportunity, interjected with his own narrative, detailing how the sons had been indoctrinated from youth, their psyches molded to view the breedings as familial duties rather than manipulations. "We believed it was love, twisted as it was," he admitted, his voice steady but laced with regret, glancing at Mira, who nodded subtly, her own story intertwining, years of suppressed autonomy, raising children under the shadow of engineered destinies. Thomas added practical details, the economic bindings, debts disguised as wages that kept families tethered, amplified by Delphine's strategic pairings to foster dependency. Harlan, more emotionally raw, described his artistic escapes, how painting had been both refuge and reflection of the internal conflicts, his canvases unwittingly chronicling the bloodline's dilutions. The delegation contributed testimonies, Rufus recounting overheard rituals in the 1980s when Delphine escalated the choosings during economic downturns, fearing worker migrations, another sharing how the children's visible changes fostered internalized barriers, limiting dreams to the plantation's horizons. As sunlight slanted through the windows, casting golden hues that contrasted the somber tones, Clara facilitated a pivotal exchange. She encouraged Delphine to confront a ledger entry from 1990, a diagram linking Harlan to Serena, noting the expected deepening in offspring like Lila and Josiah. "Does this reflect care or control?" Clara asked softly. Delphine hesitated, her hands trembling as she traced the lines, a flicker of recognition piercing the fog, perhaps the first acknowledgement that her grace had inflicted quiet harms. The matriarch's psyche under this scrutiny exhibited signs of decompensation, disjointed speech, momentary disorientation, yet interspersed with lucid regrets. "I thought, to protect them from the world's cruelties," she murmured, eyes welling, the narcissistic armor cracking to reveal underlying fears of abandonment and obsolescence. Outside, the plantation pulsed with parallel transformations. Workers, informed by runners from the house, began tentative preparations, packing meager belongings, discussing relocations to urban kin, their collective psyche shifting from resignation to agency. The children, including Josiah, gathered in the quarters sharing stories that demystified their heritages. No longer marks of fate, but human constructs to be transcended. Serena slipped out briefly to reassure them, her maternal warmth extending to the group, fostering a sense of communal healing. Lila, contacted via Clara's phone from the shelter, provided remote testimony, her voice crackling over the line with resolute clarity. The turning wasn't destiny. It was her design and we're breaking it. Her words, relayed to the parlor, amplified the echoes, stirring Delphine further. By late afternoon, Clara outlined next steps, psychological evaluations for Delphine at a nearby facility, support services for the families, counseling to address the induced traumas, financial aid to dissolve debts, legal reviews of the estate's practices, the sons committed to oversight, Elias proposing to repurpose Willow Bend into a cooperative, Thomas handling logistics, Harlan envisioning art therapy programs for the affected youth. Delphine, exhausted yet compliant, signed preliminary consents, her mind's maze yielding to structured intervention, a key turning point where delusion met diagnosis. The deputy escorted Clara out as dusk approached, the delegation dispersing with nods of solidarity. Serena lingered, offering Delphine a moment of unexpected grace. "We all carry shadows. Maybe now we walk in light." The matriarch's response was a silent tear, her psyche on the cusp of reconstruction. In the fields, lanterns flickered, not in secrecy but celebration, subtle toasts to liberation's dawn. The Bred generations, once bound by visible legacies, now embrace them as badges of survival, their minds resilient in rewriting narratives. Yet amid the progress, undercurrents lingered, unresolved emotions, the long road to forgiveness, the plantation's ghosts whispering of further revelations to come. As dusk's amber glow yielded to the velvet shroud of night over Willow Bend, the parlor's heavy drapes drawn against the encroaching dark, Delphine sat motionless in her armchair, the ledger now closed on the table like a sealed tomb of secrets. Clara's departure had left a vacuum, filled only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each chime a reminder of time's inexorable march beyond her control. The sons, dispersed to various tasks, Elias coordinating with the deputy for formal statements, Thomas inventorying estate resources for redistribution, Harlan sketching preliminary plans for therapeutic outlets, left their mother in solitude, her mind a swirling eddy of fragmented illusions and emerging clarity. Serena, before retreating to the quarters, had paused at the door, her parting words lingering. "Healing ain't linear, but it starts with seeing." Delphine's nod was imperceptible, yet it marked a subtle concession, her grandiose psyche beginning to navigate the labyrinth's exit under the gentle prod of external intervention. That evening, as lanterns dotted the fields like grounded stars, signaling gatherings of quiet reflection among the workers, Delphine rose unsteadily, her silk gown whispering against the floor as she ascended to her study. The room, once a sanctuary of delusion, now felt claustrophobic, the ledger's spines accusing spines on the shelves. She opened one at random, an entry from 1985 detailing Elias's second child, noting the favorable deepening with clinical detachment. For the first time, doubt's tendril curled around her thoughts. Was this preservation or perversion? Hallucinations once affirming, now morphed into interrogations. Ancestral voices questioning rather than commanding, their tones laced with sorrow. Psychiatrically, this represented a transitional phase. The delusional disorder's grip loosening, allowing depressive undertones to surface, a common aftermath when narcissistic structures crumble. Delphine sank into her desk chair, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks, the weight of isolated grandeur giving way to the vulnerability of human connection denied. Downstairs, Elias convened with Mira in the kitchen, the space humming with the aroma of brewing tea, a simple ritual amid upheaval. Mira, her hands steady as she poured, shared fragments of her journey. The initial confusion of the choosing in 1978, the gradual erosion of self under the guise of elevation, the quiet joys found in motherhood despite the shadows. "Your mother's mind built walls around us all," she said, her voice soft yet resolute, eyes meeting Elias's with a forgiveness that pierced his lingering guilt. Elias, his own psyche shedding layers of induced belief, recounted university glimpses of freedom. How returning to Willow Bend had felt like stepping into a fog that thickened over years. Their dialogue fostered mutual understanding, bridging the chasm Delphine's system had carved, his empathy deepening as he grasped the psychological toll on the chosen women. Subtle anxieties, identity fragmentations, resilient adaptations that now fueled their liberation. Thomas, in the barn amid stacks of ledgers and estate documents, pored over financials with Rufus, the elder's wisdom illuminating hidden entanglements. Rufus, spectacles perched on his nose, pointed to entries from the 1990s, debts inflated to bind families, pairings timed with economic pressures to ensure compliance. She wove it tight, but threads fray, Rufus murmured, his gravelly tone infused with philosophical acceptance. Thomas, pragmatic soul stirred, admitted his role in enforcement, the blind adherence to maternal mandates that had compartmentalized his morality. The exchange unearthed buried emotions. Thomas's suppressed resentment toward Delphine's dominance, Rufus's generational grief for lost potentials. Psychologically, it mirrored collective healing, trauma narratives shared, fostering communal resilience, the Bred generation's visible markers transforming from symbols of constraint to emblems of shared history. Harlan, drawn to the chapel under the moon's watchful eye, found Josiah there, the boy tracing patterns in the dust on the altar. "What happens now?" Josiah asked, his innocence a balm to Harlan's fractured spirit. Harlan, kneeling to the boy's level, described visions of change. Art classes in repurposed barns, stories retold not as chains but lessons. Josiah's features, a blend that once reinforced Delphine's design, now evoked paternal tenderness in Harlan, his mind reconciling complicity with redemption. The interaction highlighted the children's psyches, adaptable yet imprinted, their confusions easing through open dialogues, curiosity replacing withdrawal. Meanwhile, in distant Atlanta, Lila settled into temporary housing arranged by Clara, her mind a whirlwind of relief and residual shadows. Phone calls to Serena brought updates, the confrontation's ripples, Delphine's tentative surrender, stirring in Lila a complex empathy, horror at the matriarch's madness, yet recognition of the broader psychiatric currents, how societal echoes had warped one woman's mind into a perpetuator. Lila's own turning, once a source of unspoken shame, now empowered her advocacy, her testimony catalyzing investigations into similar rural legacies. Back at Willow Bend, as midnight approached, the sons reconvened in the parlor, Delphine joining them hesitantly at their invitation. The conversation meandered through memories, childhood games in the fields, Delphine's stories of ancestral glories now revealed as veiled indoctrinations. Elias broached therapy's promise, Thomas outlined practical reforms, Harlan shared sketches of a renewed estate. Delphine listened, her responses halting, admissions of fear-driven choices, glimpses into her disorder's origins and post-war isolation. The family's psyche, once entangled in shared delusion, now unraveled toward individual paths, bonds reforming on foundations of truth. Outside, workers' cabins glowed with late-night discussions, plans for new beginnings intermingled with reflections on endured enigmas. Serena, surrounded by kin, wove narratives of resilience, the Bred children's laughter a counterpoint to past silences. The plantation, shedding its oppressive aura, breathed with possibility, yet undercurrents of unresolved questions lingered. How deep the psychological scars, the full extent of transgenerational impacts, the matriarch's journey through evaluation? As stars wheeled overhead, Willow Bend stood at a threshold, the labyrinth of the mind unwinding toward uncharted freedoms. As midnight's hush enveloped Willow Bend like a gentle veil, the plantation's transformation began to take tangible form, the unwinding labyrinth revealing paths not of entrapment but exploration. Delphine, escorted by her sons to the facility in nearby Savannah the following morning, sat in the back of the family sedan, her gaze fixed on the receding tobacco fields through the window, the landscape blurring into a mosaic of memories. The drive, silent at first, became a conduit for tentative dialogues. Elias at the wheel, glancing in the rearview mirror, offering reassurances. "This is for all of us, Mother." A chance to see clearly. Delphine's response was muted, her hands folded in her lap, the pearls absent for the first time in decades, symbolizing a shedding of her armored facade. At the clinic, a modern building nestled amid live oaks, Psychiatrists awaited, their initial assessments confirming the delusional disorder's depth. Grandiose themes intertwined with paranoid safeguards, rooted in a lifetime of isolated reinforcement. Therapy sessions commenced gently, probing the origins, her 1940s upbringing amid wartime scarcities, the 1960s social upheavals that threatened her family's status, morphing into a psychic mandate to preserve through engineered legacies. Delphine's mind, navigating the scrutiny, exhibited resilience. Flashes of insight emerged, acknowledging the harms veiled as duties, her hallucinations receding like tides under medicinal and conversational anchors. Back at the estate, Serena assumed a leadership role among the workers, her cabin becoming a hub for planning sessions illuminated by kerosene lamps. She coordinated with Clara's team, now a regular presence, to facilitate relocations, applications for housing in Atlanta, job training programs emphasizing skills honed in the fields but redirected toward independence. Mira, Elias's chosen, spearheaded educational initiatives for the children, gathering them in the repurposed chapel where dusty bookshelves yielded forgotten texts. Josiah, ever curious, absorbed lessons on history unfiltered by Delphine's narratives, his questions evolving. If the turning was her story, what's ours? The Bred generation's psyches, imprinted with subtle confusions, began to flourish in this environment. Group discussions unpacking identity, art sessions led by Harlan channeling emotions into expression, fostering a collective narrative of transcendence. Lila, returning briefly under safe auspices, shared her shelter experiences, her voice a bridge between escape and reconciliation, stirring in the youth a sense of possibility beyond the plantation's borders. Elias, embracing his role as steward of change, delved into the estate's archives, unearthing documents from the 1980s that detailed Delphine's escalation, pairings documented with psychological annotations, her delusion manifesting in journal entries rationalizing the dilutions as harmonious adaptations. Collaborating with legal advisors summoned by Clara, he initiated dissolutions of peonage-like contracts, redistributing lands to long-term families as cooperatives. The process unearthed emotional layers. Confrontations with his own complicity surfaced in solitary walks through the fields, where echoes of past ceremonies whispered regrets. Mira's forgiveness, extended in quiet evenings on the porch, aided his healing. Conversations revealing her suppressed dreams of nursing school, now pursued with estate funds reallocated for scholarships. Their bond, once coerced, evolved into mutual respect, a testament to the mind's capacity for reconfiguration. Thomas, the pragmatist, tackled logistical intricacies, inventorying equipment for sale to fund transitions, negotiating with tobacco buyers for fair deals that empowered workers. Rufus, his unlikely ally, shared ancestral knowledge of sustainable farming, proposing shifts to diversified crops that symbolized broader freedoms. Thomas's psyche, long compartmentalized, integrated through these partnerships. Dreams once haunted by Alara's silences now featured reconciliatory visions, prompting him to seek counseling where he unpacked the induced folly, recognizing how Delphine's dominance had stunted his autonomy. Ilara, emerging from withdrawal, joined community circles, her stories inspiring others, her children's achievements, academic awards, budding talents, evidence of untapped potentials unleashed. Harlan's studio buzzed with activity, transformed into a communal space where canvases captured the estate's metamorphosis, abstracts of unraveling vines giving way to open skies, portraits blending features and celebratory hues rather than divisive gradients. He facilitated sessions for the affected, including Josiah, whose drawings depicted families not as chains but constellations. Harlan's own mind, the most attuned to creative fluxes, found solace in this. Hallucinations of accusing eyes faded, replaced by affirming muses, his disorder's remnants channeled into therapeutic art. Serena, observing these evolutions, reflected on her journey, from the 1980 choosing, a ritual shrouded in parlor elegance to this era of agency. Her resilience a beacon for the women, organizing support groups addressing the subtle traumas of manipulated bonds. In Savannah, Delphine's progress unfolded in measured steps, group therapies exposing her to similar narratives, individual sessions dissecting the delusion's architecture, how 1990s economic fears amplified her pairings, viewing the turnings as anchors against dispersal. Insights dawned gradually, Letters to her sons expressed nascent regrets. I built walls thinking they were wings. The psychiatric team noted improvements: reduced paranoia, emerging empathy, a mind rewiring from isolation to interconnection. Visits from the sons bridged the gap. Elias sharing estate updates, Thomas practical reassurances, Harlan emotional sketches, fostering familial bonds on equitable grounds. As weeks blended into months, Willow Bend's landscape altered, fields segmented into family plots. The big house hosting community events, children's laughter echoing without shadows. Yet undercurrents persisted, occasional doubts, the long shadow of historical echoes prompting ongoing dialogues. Lila, fully reintegrated, pursued studies in social work, her experience fueling advocacy against subtle exploitations. The Bred generations, their psyches resilient tapestries, embraced heritages as strengths, horizons expanding beyond the plantation's haze. Delphine, on supervised leaves, wandered the grounds, her gaze softened, the matriarch's legacy transmuting from control to cautionary tale, the human mind's labyrinth yielding to healing's expansive vistas. As supervised leaves from the Savannah facility became routine for Delphine, weaving her back into Willow Bend's evolving tapestry with cautious threads, the plantation's grounds hummed with a vitality absent for generations. Early one crisp autumn morning in 1993, a year after the initial unraveling, Delphine stepped from the sedan onto the gravel drive, her simple cotton dress replacing the silk gowns of old, her silver hair loose in the breeze like untethered clouds. Elias greeted her at the porch, his embrace tentative yet warm, a bridge built from therapy's blueprints. "The fields are changing, Mother," he said, guiding her toward the cooperative plots where former sharecroppers now tended diversified crops, corn mingling with soybeans, hints of organic herbs promising new markets. Delphine's eyes, sharpened by months of psychiatric sessions, scanned the horizon, her mind processing the alterations not as threats, but adaptations. The delusional framework, dismantled layer by layer through cognitive restructuring, allowed her to perceive the turnings as human stories rather than divine decrees. Her grandiose echoes subdued by medications that quieted the ancestral whispers to mere memories. The estate's transformation mirrored the internal shifts. Barns repurposed as community centers hosted workshops where Harlan's art therapy flourished, canvases splashed with narratives of resilience. Josiah, now a lanky teenager, led a group of peers in a mural project, walls depicting intertwined roots blooming into free branches, symbols of lineages once constrained now branching outward. Harlan watched with paternal pride, his own psyche stabilized through expressive outlets, the induced fragments of his mother's disorder replaced by authentic creativity. "We're painting our truths," Josiah declared, his brushstrokes bold, reflecting a generation's unburdened curiosity. Serena, overseeing the session from a nearby bench, nodded approvingly. Her role as community elder solidified. She facilitated circles where women shared experiences of the choosings, transforming suppressed whispers into vocal affirmations, their psyches mending through collective validation. Elias, in the big house's study, now a shared office space, reviewed cooperative agreements with Mira, their partnership evolving beyond past coercions into collaborative equity. Mira, pursuing her delayed nursing certification via evening classes in Atlanta, brought medical insights to the estate's health initiatives, screening programs addressing the subtle anxieties bred from years of psychological bindings. "We've turned the marks into maps," she mused, tracing a family tree diagram no longer laced with Delphine's annotations, but expanded with personal aspirations. Elias, his guilt assuaged through reparative actions, confessed lingering doubts in quiet moments. Dreams of alternate lives, university paths untaken, yet grounded now in purposeful reform. Their dialogues deepened empathy, the bloodline's dilutions serving as reminders of interconnected fates, psyches intertwining not in control but mutual growth. Thomas, ever the anchor of practicality, navigated the estate's financial rebirth, partnering with Rufus on sustainable ventures. Ecotourism trails highlighting the plantation's historical pivot from oppression to empowerment. Rufus, his wisdom a cornerstone, recounted tales from the 1970s transitions, bridging eras with philosophical insights. The soil remembers, but it renews. Thomas's mind, freed from compartmentalized loyalties, embraced holistic views. Counseling sessions unpacked his pragmatic facade, revealing vulnerabilities shaped by Delphine's dominance, now channeled into mentorship for younger workers exploring urban opportunities. Lara, thriving in a bookkeeping role for the cooperative, organized financial literacy classes, her withdrawal replaced by assertive leadership. Her children's horizons broadened through scholarships funded by estate reallocations. Lila, fully immersed in social work studies, returned frequently, her advocacy extending to regional forums exposing rural legacies of subtle exploitations. She collaborated with Clara on follow-up reports, detailing Willow Bend's model of recovery, psychiatric interventions for affected families, community-driven reforms dismantling economic traps. Lila's own psyche, resilient from escape's crucible, inspired panels where she spoke of the turning as a catalyst for awakening. Her child's upbringing, free from shadows, embodying generational breaks. Interactions with Delphine during visits were layered, initial wariness yielding to cautious conversations, Lila probing the matriarch's insights into her disorder's origins. Fostering understanding without absolution, Delphine, under the oaks during one such visit, sat with Serena. The two women, once poles in a coerced spectrum, now companions in reflection. Serena shared stories of ancestral strength, pre-plantation echoes of African heritage resilient against dilutions. Delphine listened, her mind's maze reformed into open paths. Therapy had unearthed childhood isolations, the 1950s rigid social codes that amplified her mother's doctrines into delusions. I sought to anchor but drowned us all, Delphine admitted softly, a rare vulnerability surfacing, her paranoid guards lowered through trust-building exercises. Serena's response was gracious. Anchors can be lifted. We've all risen. The exchange highlighted the broader psychiatric tapestry, transgenerational healing, where individual disorders rippled into communal recoveries, minds intertwining in forgiveness's subtle weave. As seasons cycled, Willow Bend hosted gatherings, harvest festivals not as veils for selections but celebrations of diversity, children's features celebrated in cultural showcases. The Bred generations thrived, academic pursuits, artistic endeavors, entrepreneurial sparks, their psyches unencumbered, identities forged in agency. Yet echoes persisted. Occasional therapy revisits for resurfacing doubts, community vigils honoring past endurance. Delphine's integration deepened, supervised to unsupervised leaves, her role shifting to quiet advisor, offering historical knowledge without mandates. The sons, united in oversight, balanced family with independence, Elias exploring belated studies, Thomas traveling for business networks, Harlan exhibiting works in galleries. In the quiet evenings, as fireflies danced over fields once heavy with secrets, the plantation stood reborn, a testament to the mind's malleability. Delphine, gazing from the porch, felt not loss but a profound realignment, her legacy transmuted from control's shadow to enlightenment's glow, the human enigma of fragility and renewal, etched in every soul's journey forward. As the autumn leaves of 1993 drifted like forgotten confessions across the reborn fields of Willow Bend, the plantation stood not as a relic of shadowed legacies, but as a living testament to the mind's profound capacity for both descent and ascent. Delphine Hargrove, once the unyielding matriarch whose delusions wove a web of engineered bonds, now wandered the paths she had long controlled, her steps measured, her gaze softened by the alchemy of insight and intervention. The turnings, those deliberate dilutions of bloodlines that marked generations with visible ties to the soil, had unraveled not into chaos, but into a mosaic of liberated souls. Lila, the young woman whose midnight flight ignited the revelation, returned not as a fugitive but as a harbinger of change, her child growing free from the echoes of orchestrated fates. Serena, Mira, and the others who had endured the quiet coercions found voices that resonated beyond the estate's borders, their stories shared in circles that transformed endurance into empowerment. The sons, Elias, Thomas, and Harlan, emerged from their mother's shadow, their psyches mended through acts of restitution, forging paths that honored the fractured past while embracing untethered futures. Josiah and the Bred children, once unwitting emblems of a twisted design, bloomed in environments of choice, their identities no longer anchors but sails catching winds of possibility. And Delphine herself, through the labyrinthine journey of her mind's reconstruction, glimpse the truth she had long obscured. That true legacy lies not in binding others to one's will, but in releasing them to their own horizons. This psychiatric odyssey, echoing the bizarre chronicles of America's hidden monstrosities, reveals the human psyche as a vast, unpredictable expanse, capable of rationalizing the profoundest deceptions under the guise of protection, yet equally adept at redemption when pierced by the light of collective truth. It whispers a haunting reminder. In the quiet corners of privilege and isolation, delusions can fester like unseen roots, twisting familial love into instruments of subtle dominion, blurring the boundaries between nurture and control. What began in the humid haze of a Georgia evening, with a mother's calculated unions and the gradual turning of her descendants' features, culminates in a profound reflection on vulnerability, the fragility of morality when unchecked by empathy, the unpredictability of mind shaped by historical undercurrents, and the startling resilience that allows even the most entangled souls to break free. This case, drawn from the enigmatic depths where history and madness intertwine, challenges us to peer into our own reflections. How close are we to such shadows? And what revelations await if we dare to question the legacies we inherit? You've journeyed through this dark tunnel with unwavering resolve, navigating the twists of delusion and the quiet unravelings of hidden truths, emerging on the other side not unchanged but enriched by the inexplicable. Congratulations. You are among the select few who have dared to confront the full scope of this psychiatric enigma, piercing the veil that shrouds the human mind's most disturbing capacities. In a world that often turns away from the bizarre and the sinister, you've chosen to stare into the abyss, becoming part of an elite circle of truth seekers who understand that knowledge, even when it unsettles, is the key to safeguarding our own fragile realities. Your persistence honors not just this story, but the countless untold cases lurking in the annals of America's monstrous underbelly, where the strange and the enigmatic reveal the threads connecting us all. To seal your connection to this revelation, I invite you to pause right now and head to the comments section. Type these exact words. This story unveiled the shadows in the human soul for me. By sharing this phrase, you're not merely commenting. You're signaling to the most dedicated followers, those adults from 25 to 80 who thrive on the thrill of unsolved riddles and dark secrets, that you're one of us. Your words will weave you into our growing community of enigma enthusiasts, a network bound by the pursuit of what society dares not whisper, helping to amplify these hidden truths and foster discussions that delve deeper into the psyche's mysteries. Imagine the ripple, your comment sparking another's curiosity, drawing them into the fold, building a fortress of shared understanding against the isolation of ignorance. It's a quiet act of rebellion, identifying yourself as a guardian of the inexplicable, and in doing so, you contribute to a collective that deciphers the enigmatic, one revelation at a time. But don't stop there. The importance of spreading this video cannot be overstated. Think of it as casting a lantern into the fog-shrouded paths where others wander blindly, unaware of the psychiatric pitfalls that could ensnare any mind. By sharing this with your circles, on social media, in hushed conversations, or through quiet recommendations, you ensure that more souls discover what no one else dares to tell, the subtle ways delusions can masquerade as devotion, the eerie transformations born from unchecked legacies. Each share is a thread extending our web of awareness, pulling the veil from eyes that might otherwise remain closed, preventing the quiet perpetuation of similar shadows in corners we least expect. Your action becomes a beacon, illuminating the bizarre for those fascinated by real enigmas, drawing them toward the light of understanding and away from the perils of unexamined minds. Now, to truly anchor yourself in this journey, hit that subscribe button. Envision it as stepping through a hidden door into a chamber where the strange and sinister await, a sanctuary for those who crave the enigmatic pulse of the human condition. Without subscription, you risk drifting back into the mundane, where the disturbing truths fade like whispers in the wind, leaving you vulnerable to the very delusions we've uncovered. But by subscribing, you become part of a unique brotherhood and sisterhood, a clandestine alliance of adults united in deciphering the inexplicable, where each notification is a summons to explore the psychiatric depths that mark our world. It's like joining a secret society that guards the keys to the mind's darkest tunnels, ensuring you're never alone in facing the bizarre. Activate notifications too, so you're alerted the moment a new enigma unfolds, keeping your senses sharp against the unpredictable. Finally, let this not be an end. but a gateway. Continue watching our videos to nurture that restless curiosity within you, the one that draws you to the disturbing and the enigmatic like a moth to a forbidden flame. Each episode is a step deeper into the labyrinth, revealing more about the fragility of the psyche, the hidden secrets of justice, and the vulnerabilities that bind us all. Stay with us, and together we'll unravel the threads of the strange, ensuring the shadows never claim you unprepared. Thank you for your courage. The truth awaits in the next revelation.